you for that, Andrea, and thank you for everyone out there being here. I wish that circumstances had been different and we could have all been in person, but I ask for your grace and that we decided it was just a better option to be virtual for this event. And so I hope that everyone out there is healthy and happy this evening. I have the privilege this evening. By the way, I'm Chris Saunders, Associate Editor of NC State Magazine, the publication here at NC State, the alumni publication. And I have the privilege tonight to introduce everyone to Dr. Jason Miller and his team of former graduate students who helped put together this new project that they're going to unveil to you guys this evening. Dr. Miller is a professor of English, but oftentimes he's mistaken for a history professor, something that he kind of laughs at and calls wonderful. That's because a lot of his research takes him down historical roads. You all may have heard Dr. Miller present in the past. He's done presentations about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s visit to Rocky Mount in 1962. It was on this visit that King first said the immortal words, "I have a dream," that he would go on to use 9 months later in the March on Washington in August of 1963. Dr. Miller has also done presentations in the last year on King's visit here to NC State, a sometimes forgotten visit in which he appeared in Reynolds Coliseum in 1966. And this, of course, was the same time that the Ku Klux Klan marched up Fayetteville Street to protest King's appearance here at NC State. These flirtations with history, don't mistake them for a love affair. Dr. Miller's love is literature, and he dances in language, and you'll hear that on display tonight. And there's no better way to hear that than to hear him talk about Langston Hughes, the American poet and leader of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and 1930s. Dr. Miller first wrote about Hughes in 2011, and he also put a biography out about Hughes last year in 2020, which was the impetus for this project that he and his grad students will talk to you about tonight. That project is entitled Backlash Blues, Nina Simone and Langston Hughes. And it is certainly a continuation of Miller's adoration for Hughes, and it unveils some new things. So this project, through newspapers, audio and video clips, correspondence between Hughes and Simone, and a treasure trove of photographs, help tell the story of the friendship between Langston Hughes and a blues and soul legend. Okay, that friendship was first sparked in 1949 when Hughes gave a lecture in Asheville, North Carolina. And in the audience of that lecture was a little girl from Tryon, North Carolina named Eunice Wayman. She would grow up, change her name, and become the icon that we all know her as, Nina Simone. During the 1960s, the friendship between Simone and Hughes certainly intensified, and the project's title, in fact, is taken from a song whose lyrics Hughes wrote for Simone. Miller and his team can point to two other instances where Hughes influenced her to record songs. And for the first time ever, this project argues that Hughes was a major important source to help guide Simone's transformation from a shy standards singer to the high priestess of soul, a moniker by which she is eternally known. I got to spend time with Dr. Miller and these students and write a feature in NC State Magazine that will be in the fall issue, which will be out in November. So this is kind of a preview tonight, right? But two quick things about Dr. Miller. One is when you're in a Zoom with him, he'll start off with, one quick thing. And you know when he says that you're going to get some interesting piece of information that he did not know the last time. And it's pretty awe-inspiring. And so I think there'll probably be a lot of wow moments for you guys out there tonight. Second thing is that Dr. Miller never comes from a place of ego. And so he'll oftentimes open up his projects to his students, both undergrad and graduate, to participate. And that was the case with this project of Backlash Blues. So with that, I want to introduce his grad students that helped him with this project. First, we have Kelly Pryor, who is a U.S. Army officer currently teaching English composition and literature at the United States Military Academy at West Point. She earned an MA in English from NC State in 2021 as part of the Army's Advanced Civil Schooling Program. Her current research interests include exploring the intersections of Black American literature and popular music, as well as looking at William Shakespeare against current theories of race and class. She's originally from Norfolk, Virginia. She's married to Lance Pryor, and she has a daughter named Virginia. A professional creative for the last 5 years with work that stretches back a full decade, Isaac Hughes Green is an adjunct instructor of composition at North Carolina Central University, a 2021 graduate of the Fiction MFA program here at NC State, and a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. His writing has been published in the Georgia Review, the Best Debut Short Stories of 2021, the PEN America Dow Prize. He's screened a film at the Cannes Short Film Corner, as well as and he has won awards for his writing, his screenwriting, and his cinematography. Next, we have Austin Horn. He is a PhD student at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. He graduated with a master's degree from here from NC State. And his work typically addresses issues in post-1945 American literature, as well as critical university studies. And then last but not least, we have Lauren McKenzie. She also graduated with her master's from NC State here in 2021. And she is in her second week of teaching ELA and creative writing at Pine Springs Prep in Holly Springs, North Carolina. Here's the cool thing about all of them. They're all teachers, which is awesome. So pretty inspiring in and of itself there. So thank you all for being wonderful teachers. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for being a great teacher. And I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Miller and the panel of his grad students to talk to you all about Backlash Blues.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a real honor working with the Alumni Association. And Chris, I've had the pleasure of being interviewed by quite a few people, and I've never seen anybody do such exhaustive research and work. The university has a real gift in you for tracking down these students, highlighting their work, and trying to do the noble cause of bringing attention to this research. I sincerely thank you, Chris, and I hope that this institution recognizes how much you've contributed. As we've said before, that when we hold up Nina Simone's music to the light, we often see Langston Hughes hovering behind it like a watermark on bonded paper. If you're not familiar with Nina Simone, you may think of her as the jazz singer equal to what Stokely Carmichael was to the civil rights movement. You're probably familiar with Langston Hughes. Born in 1901, dying in 1967, he's most recognizable for a line from his poem, A Dream Deferred, making its way into the title of Lorraine Hansberry's play, A Raisin in the Sun. We often think of Hughes as a writer. He had his name on 58 books by the time he died. That did not include the 17 plays he wrote, 5 of which made it on Broadway. But Hughes is such a bigger entity than that. He was an editor who discovered Alice Walker. He was proud of that discovery. Speaking of A Raisin in the Sun, the star next to Sidney Poitier and Ruby Dee was a woman named Claudia McNeil. And Hughes was quite fond of the fact that he discovered Claudia McNeil and put her on stage in his Broadway musical, Simply Heavenly. Tonight, we're extending, as part of a group effort, this notion that Hughes wasn't merely also an editor, he wasn't a recognizer of talent, he was also an unusual role of mentor. And his mentoring to Nina Simone is really a key avenue that opens up a number of avenues for what we have to see here. I'm going to share my screen and hope that folks can see that out there. Did that come up for a second? There it is. What you can do on the site when you look at it on your own is you can track the rough drafts of Hughes writing the great spotlight on Nina Simone, much in the way that Oprah Winfrey would kind of name folks. Langston Hughes' endorsement, which was usually no more than a paragraph or a sentence, was actually an entire article devoted to Simone. That was groundbreaking. You can see that the article didn't just appear in 1960, though. It also made its life into 1964, appearing on the back of the album that Nina Simone had, as well as several concert posters. That review had a life of its own, at first distinguishing Simone as very, very different from Billie Holiday. Our experts here are going to take up the rest of our time, and they're going to have better success with technology than we just did. Let's look at some of the things that they'll be previewing before we get started. One question we had in this realm of scholarship was, we knew that Simone and Hughes had met in 1949 in Asheville. What happened there? Why was Hughes there? What can we establish for the context? That will be answered tonight. We also knew that another key moment in their life came in 1960 at the Newport Jazz Festival, where they met as equals. an established singer and an expert on the blues as well as poetry. So two folks will be taking their expertise and telling us more about 1960 Newport and giving us an idea of how Simone shows up in Hughes's poetry. And we will begin with the song in question. If you saw The Summer of Soul, you know that Nina Simone sings one of Langston Hughes's poems, Backlash Blues. Coming into this, you might say, was this a Hughes poem? Is this a Simone song? How do the two collaborate? We'll be answering that question as well. So I'll be stepping aside because you can imagine how many contributors have framed this. We have no less than 25 people now that have shaped this, everyone from Simone's key biographer to a number of students, and the work is ongoing. Just recently, the team was made aware that Simone actually sang November 1st, 1968 at Reynolds Coliseum. So this project continues. But I want to make it very clear to everyone out there that none of these things would have happened without the four students we have to hear right now. They're all scholars, they are all experts, and their research and their study is at the very center of this project. Without them, there is no website. So it's my pleasure to share this time with these incredible experts. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Isaac to tell us more about Backlash Blues. Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Thanks so much for your guidance with this project and for your support of my career. And thank you, Chris, for asking such thoughtful interview questions when you reached out. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can watch a beginning clip of Backlash Blues. Can you all see that? Okay.
It's the backlash. It's the backlash. Who do you think I am? You raise my taxes and freeze my wages. Send my only son to Vietnam. You give me second-class houses, second-class schools. I know you think all colored people are just second-class fools. Mr. Backlash. I'm gonna leave you with the blues, yes I am. When I try to find a job to earn a little cash, all you got to offer is your mean old white backlash. But the world is big, big and bright and round. And it's full of other folks like me who are black, yellow, beige, and brown. It's the backlash. I'm gonna leave you with the blues. Yes, I am.
All right. So that is a performance in England on November 14th of 1968. And so Nina Simone actually performed a similar version of this song at Reynolds Coliseum, as Dr. Miller was just mentioning, a few weeks later. I want to share my final project for this Langston Hughes class that I completed. Can you all see the Backlash Blues annotation? Is that up on the screen? It's not up there? Okay, hold on. How about now? Is that better? Okay. So my approach to trying to understand this song and this collaboration was to analyze the available video clips of the performance of Backlash Blues and show the initial poem and what the meaning was behind the poem, and then to go through and show how Nina Simone had adapted it, and how the adaptation of the song changed over her different performances. So I started out with the poem, with Hughes's poem. This is the direct transcription of the poem. And I just wanted to try to find the meaning behind specific lines. So with the first line, Mr. Backlash, I looked into it and found out that this poem was published in July of '67. And around that time, the most pressing issue on the minds of the American populace was the war in Vietnam. The poem strikes a tone that broadly calls out systemic inequity in the US, but it can also be understood as a protest poem against the Vietnam War. And so this Mr. Backlash figure can be understood to involve President Lyndon Johnson. And this stanza goes on to reference some of his policies. So then I looked further into, what does a line like "you give me second-class houses" actually mean in the context of the time period. And I found that in the 1930s, the Federal Housing Administration began to rely on maps drawn by Homeowners Loan Corporation, and they gave low insurance ratings to neighborhoods with African Americans and other people of color. And this meant that it was harder for African Americans to get home loans. So another piece of statistical data that backed up some of what Hughes was writing about was in the beginning of the third stanza, when I tried to find a job to earn a little cash, all you got to offer is white backlash. In '67, there were very low rates of unemployment for whites, 3.4%, but rates for African Americans were twice that at 7.4%. So those are some of my takes on Hughes's poem. And if you want to see more of them, you can click on the link on the website that has this whole project. So then there's Nina Simone's adaptation, and she's relatively faithful to the original poem. She does add in a refrain, Mr. Backlash, I'm going to leave you with the backlash blues, which occurs a couple of times. And she changes mean old from the second to last stanza to the middle stanza and adds it to is your mean old white backlash. So those were the initial changes that Simone made, but as we'll see as we continue through the different versions of the song, there were many more. So this version, Newport Jazz Festival '67, was, I believe, one of the first, if not the first, performances after Hughes died. And she mentions that she basically gives an intro that is dedicated to Hughes and also an outro. And she ad-libs a little bit in this, got no more fear, gotta tell you how I feel. And then we have this version in England, which is the version that I was just showing you. And so in this version, she actually incorporates an entire 2 new stanzas that are rhyming just like the rest of the song, but incorporate lyrics that are dedicated to Hughes, in which she talks about how Hughes has inspired her and led her to want to make sure that the doors are open for other people. And I think particularly she means people of color in this context. And then there's the Montreux Jazz performance. And so Nina went through mounting legal, personal, and mental health issues towards the late '70s. And so this performance, you can see just from the transcription of the lyrics that this one is much longer. And it's because she ad-libbed. And I think this is one of the most emotional performances of the song. This is my favorite one because she was going through so many things personally, and it really came across in the way that she sang the song. It's also my favorite because she transitions the song from being primarily about Vietnam and also about Black liberation to also being about feminism. And in particular, she does that when she talks about when a Black daughter tries to find a little job to earn a little cash. Before that line was just when I try to find a job, but she makes it into when a Black daughter, so this version of the song was performed after the Vietnam War was over. And so I think what she's doing is giving the song a new audience, a new meaning by incorporating some of these feminist ideas. So those are some of the changes that I found in the song. And if you would like to see more, like I said, you can go on the website and look closely at the annotations that I made. So yeah, I hope Hope you learned something, and this was a great project to work on. So up next we have Austin.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And I just want to extend a thank you again to both Dr. Miller and to Chris for not only mentoring us through this whole process, not only during a pandemic, but to help us out at least professionally, and to Chris, just like Isaac had said, for asking such thought-provoking questions that will hopefully be illuminated further in the upcoming issue of Instant University. Just a quick heads up, I have a slight speech impediment, so you are not experiencing any sort of technical difficulties if you hear me hiccup for whatever reason. So my contributions to the overall project have to do primarily with the 1960 Newport Jazz Festival and the riots that happened therein, but also to see how those riots affected Hughes's poetry, which also saw the placements of Nina Simone herself in his poetry. So just a quick summary of the 1960 Newport Jazz Festival and its riots. It started, I believe, on June the 27th, 1960, in Newport, Rhode Island. By July the 1st, 1960, there were small incitements of violence right outside of the gates of the festival, incurred and incited by primarily white college-age folks who very simply just wanted to be included in the festival itself. There was no there seemed to be not really that many calls for any sort of racial violence. They just felt left out. And what these riots ballooned to such an extent that there was that the National Guard had to be called in, and which forced the closure of the night of the festival itself, not before the final day saw Langston Hughes MC the introduction to the introduction of blues music to the jazz festival, which our esteemed Kelly Pryor will talk more about here in just a few minutes. But that's just like a little bit of a backdrop. And so what I became primarily very interested in this project is to see how this riot directly affected Hughes's poetry in the subsequent years. And so I think probably the most helpful thing for this presentation is to actually bring us over to the original copies of his poetic sequence, Ask Your Mama, 12 Moves for Jazz. Can everyone see that? Okay, so this is a scan of the original 1961 printing of Ask Your Mama, 12 Moons for Jazz. And thank you again to the Bonnecke Library for supplying this in such pandemic notice. Well, so what ends up happening is he publishes this poetic sequence not more than a year after the riots, and it is critically acclaimed, but not very many people know what to do with it, mainly due to its very dense, obscure, and downright elusive content. But I became primarily really interested in this one poem called Horn of Plenty. Last name is completely coincidental. And what ends up happening in this middle poem is you start having a list of exclusively Black entertainers, and Black entertainers include, but are not limited to, singers, musicians, athletes, as well as architects. And as we can see right here on the first page, Miss Nina is introduced along with the names such as Catherine Dunham, as well as Duke Ellington, as well Dizzy Gillespie, Eric Dolphy, Miles Davis. And what I believe he's doing here is he's using his stature as a preeminent and legendary Black poet is to try and codify her name in particular as one that is among these giants, and to do so at the very outset. And not only that, following this jazz festival, which saw her perform not for the first time ever, but for the first time in this particular venue. And so my job then became to try and piece out and parse out all the different names and allusions that would continue on down through this sequence. One thing I wanted to pay particularly close attention to is the second stanza right here, where Hughes, who's known for his very meticulous form and his very attention detailed oriented mind, he's having us kind of take out he's having us be very meta for a second, where he's asking us, do you read music? And if you look right here, doesn't this not look like a piece of sheet music? And this is particularly interesting when you take into consideration that not only is he asking us this question, but the form itself, with all the capitalizations, is very suggestive of a phonograph itself, and the form of the book itself, which I can't obviously show y'all right here, but the size of it is pretty much the exact same size as that of a phonographic sleeve. And so, why am I saying all this? And I can probably stop sharing here for a second before I turn over to Kelly. Is one question we need to ask is, why study this poem in particular? Well, obviously he mentions Miss Nina by name, by himself, and also in a way that is very suggestive of this of his very friendly relationship. He could have easily have just said Nina Simone or even Miss Simone, but Miss Nina has this kind of very familial relationship that as we see is too hard to ignore. Not only that, like, he's also immortalizing her textually at the beginning of her career. That's very crudely not unlike in some instances, such as Yumpa Lulahiri's 1999 short story collection and ample Triswing collection in Interpreter Maladies. And he's also concretizing her status as not only influential and impactful as a Black entertainer, but also impactful towards this larger American literary canon and culture at large, and someone who will be influential for years to come. And with that, I think it's probably best to continue our talks about 1960 Newport Jazz Festival by our esteemed Kelly Pryor. Take it away.
Thank you, Austin, and thank you, Dr. Miller, again for including me in the project, and to the Alumni Association for having me. So my focus on the project was really on Langston Hughes' impact as a board member in 1960. So in 1960, he was announced as a new board member for the Newport Jazz Festival. And his involvement in the festival in that capacity was significant for a lot of reasons. First, it further established him as an authority in jazz and blues music. So by 1960, he had worked at famous jazz nightclubs in Paris. One's called the Grand Duke. He had written jazz and blues poetry collections like the Weary Blues. He had written a book called The First Book of Jazz. He had contributed music and liner notes and lyrics to numerous musical albums. So he's already embedded into jazz culture, and his place on the board then as a moderator on the Blues Day and as a board member is him stepping into his role as a jazz expert. The second thing it did, having him on the board did, was to give validity to the festival at a time where it was being highly criticized as a festival that whitewashed jazz and blues music. And it was also being criticized as a festival that underpaid its Black jazz artists in comparison with their more mainstream white performers. So one interesting thing about that festival is that at its inception, it was funded by two white American socialites that were married named Elaine and Louis Lorillard. So in 1960, also that year, they get divorced, and it really creates like two separate festivals. The husband stays with the Newport Jazz Festival, and the wife goes with the rival festival called the Rebel Jazz Festival, which is down the street on the same weekend. In this festival, she takes her talents and her funds there. She links up with Max Roach and Charles Mingus, jazz legends, and they do the Rebel Jazz Festival in protest, featuring Black artists and saying, hey, this is how we're gonna feature them and pay them what they're supposed to be paid. And then this same year, the husband stays with the Newport Jazz Festival, and they bring on Langston Hughes onto the board as the only Black member. And not only the only Black member, but also someone who had been very outspoken about criticizing mainly white clubs in Harlem, particularly, who maintain these Jim Crow type rules in these jazz clubs. So I think today we would call that like gentrifying of jazz culture and jazz music. So they bring in, very coincidentally, maybe not, Langston Hughes onto the board that same year. So that's something to consider. The last significant thing about Hughes being on the board that year was his mentorship and friendship with Nina Simone. So Lauren will talk more about their relationship prior to this. But at this time, Hughes was like nearing the end of his life, and Nina Simone had started to become very popular. She was already popular, but around 1960, she had hit number 20 on the Billboard charts. So amongst like popular culture, she was becoming more popular. So while we can't be certain that Langston Hughes contributed to her addition to the festival set list, it's really interesting to examine how his presence there could have had a lasting effect on her. It was her first time performing there, and she would go on to perform there, I think, 7 more times. So the 1960 festival was separated daily by genre, meaning there was a jazz day, there was a soul day, there was a blues day, and if whatever type of music you played, that's what day you played on. And that year, Nina Simone played on the first day, which is where the classical musicians played. So her placement there was one that she was well-deserved. She was trained at Juilliard. She played the piano her whole life. And there was not a lot of evidence that she was there for day 2 and 3 of the festival. But I think probably the most exciting part of my research, and I'll share my screen, is that I was able to find her on day 4 of the festival. Here we go. So this is, can you see that? Good. This is the 4th day, where Langston Hughes was actually the moderator on the blues day. Like I mentioned, Muddy Waters is performing. And if you look really closely, I'm gonna start it up. You have to pay close attention. You'll see a young Nina Simone in the audience. Got my mojo working, but just don't wake up. So now, if you've seen her, you can go back a little bit further. Got my mojo working, but just don't break. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. And yeah, so that her being there is something to consider, because her music ends up changing. The content of her music ends up changing in the next few years. So the music that we kind of associate her with, that's related to the civil rights movement, and there's a little bit of more of a blues flair, thinking about how this encounter she had could have influenced that. So yeah, that's really it. And to talk about more of their relationship, I'll be followed by Lauren McKenzie.
Good evening. I'm really excited to be here and want to thank Dr. Miller, like the rest of my fellow grads or former grad students we've graduated, for allowing us to be a part of the project and just giving us this amazing opportunity. For my portion, I started out with hoping to avoid writing another 15-page paper for Dr. Miller's lit class. He gave us the opportunity to try to do some research for an upcoming project he had. So I didn't know that it was literally going to change my life doing this project, but I'm excited to share that with you. When my research began with the discovery of a few newspaper blurbs that I found that showed in the Asheville Citizen-Times, there were some heated exchanges about the appearance of a Negro poet named Langston Hughes at Allen High School in 1949 of February. The discovery was exciting, but I really didn't have any context. So there was a lot more important information for me to dig into. And when later on Dr. Miller offered us the chance to dig deeper, I started trying to find out, what Hughes was doing at Allen High School. All I had was this isolated event, and it was still really exciting, but I wanted to know where it came from, why he was there, what the greater picture of this was, why this was important enough for them to publish in a newspaper, even though it was a very minimal amount in the newspaper. I remember noting in the project that the Boy Scouts of America got triple the amount of lines that Langston Hughes' appearance in Allen High School got, and that shocked me. So I began to uncover letters, photographs, personal correspondence, all kinds of different things as I started digging into just that performance at Allen High School. And I realized that Hughes was traveling to several places across the state. He was traveling for Negro History Week in February of 1949, which is the precursor to what would become Black History Month. So this was just now beginning to gain traction, which was a huge deal, it being in the South. Some other states, Michigan, Ohio, DC, and other places, this wasn't so uncommon, but to have this happen in the South was huge. So as that began to gain traction, and so I got further down the rabbit hole working on this project because there are so many things to sift through, and there's a lot of information, and things just kept coming up and coming up. So as soon as I would get a lead, I would just follow up and try and just grab as many straws as possible. I ended up connecting with the editor at the Mountain Express in Asheville, who published the original article that highlighted the newspaper articles with Hughes' exchange with the citizens. And he gave me the name of a woman named Mary Othello Burnett, and she is a 90-year-old graduate of Allen High School's class of 1949. After I got a chance to speak with her, I found that she had actually gotten to see Langston Hughes perform in the auditorium at Allen High School in February of 1949, and was there with her friend and fellow Glee Club member, Nina Simone. So this was a huge thing, connecting with Mary. I had the privilege of interviewing her, and over the summer, I also had the privilege of being able to visit her in person, which was a huge, huge honor and just an incredible experience. She has such a wonderful knowledge of, the times, and she created this entire world for me that I'll never be able to go back to, but I felt like I could picture it and feel it in just the words from her. So I felt like the information that I got from my timeline, I was able to build a timeline. I'll pull that up shortly. That demonstrates Hughes's whereabouts for the entire week. And I was able to pinpoint everything with documentation, minus maybe one that we're still sort of waiting on. But I have a really good, almost to a detail schedule of when and where and how he was everywhere he was that week, starting in North Carolina and ending in Boston. But I think the thing that I felt like I took the most from, of course, the information is incredible and it's something that scholars of the future can build on, but also just the urgency that we have to ask these questions. And this is not the first project Dr. Miller's been a part of. I'm thankful that it's the first and hopefully not last I've been a part of. But just the urgency of asking these questions. And, Miss Burnett is 90 years old, and I'm so thankful that we had the opportunity to talk with her, because in talking with her and in just the incredible experiences she could share with me, I was able to kind of, try to wrap my head around that there were so many things that we'll never know because we never asked the questions. We never found the people that could answer the questions. And so just the urgency of conserving what we had and continuing to ask questions and seek people out and, grab leads and, really dig in and try to preserve what we have and build on what we have. And I think that's something that's stuck out and been so, much of a privilege for me in this project, is having something I can put forth for more people to build upon. So I mentioned that in my efforts, I was able to build a timeline. I'm going to try to screen share. Is everyone able to see that? So this is the timeline. Is everybody seeing that? Yeah. Okay. So this is the timeline I was able to create starting Sunday, February 6th, 1949. Takes us from Winston-Salem to Black Mountain. The Winston-Salem performance was really awesome. He had to perform in 5 relays because over 600 people showed up in a library with a maximum capacity of 100. So this was a huge thing. His personal correspondence in Black Mountain, where he stayed in, which actually happens to be Miss Burnett's hometown. We've got 2 performances at Allen High School. And these are all photos that you're looking at that I was able to find in my history. My favorite, of course, being the center photo of Miss Burnett as her senior photo. And so I would also like to play a clip for you guys of Miss Burnett speaking. I'm hoping I'm playing the right one. Either way, you'll enjoy hearing her speak on anything she's able to.
Because Alan could acknowledge Negro history, that's what they called it back then. They could acknowledge, actually, we were studying Negro history. Our text was written by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Yeah, I can't remember the exact title, but I know it has to do with Negro history. Yeah, they could do it. Now this is weird because here in this thoroughly segregated city where Black schools are not mentioning Negro history and they're not teaching Negro history, this little school, Allen, can do it openly. It was not mentioned at any of the integrated schools I went to in Ohio or in California. And in Black Mountain, the teachers were very cautious, very cautious. I remember my first grade teacher did teach us to sing, Get Back to Allen. She did teach us to sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And that song was sung at every important meeting. And you had to know all 3 verses.
Sorry about that. I hope everyone was able to hear that clip. If I'm good, okay. There are several other clips. Miss Burnett talking about her time at Allen High School, her experience with Nina Simone, who she knows as Eunice Wayman, and her experience with Langston Hughes and how he would go on to influence her later in her career as she became a professor and she wrote her own book eventually. So I really hope that you get to check out the website. There's a ton of amazing work, and I appreciate being able to work with all of my colleagues here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Miller.
Thank you so much. Just really quickly before we turn to question and answers, it's just startling and amazing work to think that someone can uncover every moment of an event that happened in 1949, track down people who were there. Lauren's work has uncovered things that people at those libraries didn't even know existed. It's quite startling. Kelly's research continues to amaze me when I kept asking the question, why would Simone trust Hughes as a blues expert? The answer is because of what Kelly found. When she sat there, she saw someone leading Muddy Waters, leading Otis Spawn, even eventually handing lyrics for Muddy Waters to sing to close out that festival. Austin's research is stellar in so many ways. By placing Nina in that context in Hughes's imagination, he preemptively recognizes her importance and greatness. And Isaac's thoroughness and really tracking down every iteration of Backlash Blues has led me to think about what audiences were experiencing when perhaps they heard the song that was never released on vinyl, and to think of all of Simone's relationships, her intimate relationship with Lorraine Hansberry, her reliance on James Baldwin, but to think that Hughes would be embedded in that song forever as the person that told her to speak back, to talk against the Vietnam War. This is a new way of thinking about Langston Hughes. Kelly, Austin, Lauren, Isaac, I am in your debt forever. Thank you for his tremendous research and for taking the time to share it. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you so much, guys. And it's so interesting to have gotten to interview each of you guys individually, but this is the first time I've seen it presented as a whole, and I've seen the website as a whole, of course, but it's just so wonderful to hear you guys, how each piece builds off the other. And, you know, it makes me wish I had been in the class. And let me start there with one question, because this originated in a class, and I should have framed that a little better leading into it. You guys, before the pandemic, spring semester of 2020, you're in a graduate class about Langston Hughes and pop culture. And then these ideas start getting kicked around and the pandemic hits. So let me begin there. How hard was this, and I'll put it to each of you or to anyone who wants to address it, to carry out this research? I mean, this would have been a lot of research to carry out in normal times, but can you guys tell the audience how hard it was and how difficult it was to do this virtually in a pandemic, find all this stuff and coalesce it all and build it all together into one unit?
I think the biggest thing for me is in our field, sometimes we're very theory heavy. We do a lot of journal research. So because archives weren't open, because libraries weren't physically open, the means by which we had to do research was different. So I usually would not look to YouTube for research, you know, but honestly, you know, being at home, you're limited in how you can do your research. So for me, when I'm doing research on Nina Simone, on Langston Hughes, there's a lot of Google, there's a lot of, you know, things that we don't consider scholarly, but if you take time with them, you can pull scholarly elements out of them. So I think that was a forcing function of COVID.
I think at the same time, something to recognize is that, I mean, this started as a graduate seminar where at first there's this need to finish this project for a grade, and what the pandemic and what this project in particular unlocked is like we could actually take our time and really investigate all these various avenues without the looming threat of what grade will I get by the end of this?
Right.
And so to speak to Kelly's points, like, yeah, like we were having to work within the parameters of a very virtualized research experience, which is very unlike most, which is very unlike, at least in my experience, most research experiences in English. But we had to, at least I, in particular, with all these extensive footnotes, is to really have to dig into Google's archives to locate any semblance of an idea of who these people could have been. So it was, having that extra time was, it was invaluable.
Off of that, someone just Pamela Green just asked, and I know the answer, but you guys can speak to it. How did each of you kind of decide your thematic approach? What specifically you would pursue, and did Dr. Miller assign you prompts, or did you just kind of decide those entry points on your own?
So he gave us topics where he was starting to research, and he sort of gave us a list. And this was where we started in our grad seminar. But for the extension of the project, he kind of left it to us to say, okay, which direction do you want to take that? And me being, how I am personally, I came to him with a ton of questions. And of course, he always has a good, well, maybe this question, or maybe, what are we trying to find out? Like, what are we asking here? So he always has good ways to guide, but he always leaves it up to us. And he's always there, to help guide us if we need it. But he also wants us to, sort of dig in our own minds and pull out what we really want to get from something.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember how this started. I'm racking my brain over here. I don't remember, but I remember really going hard on this research at some point.
Remember, it was like broader at first, right? Like we could like kind of research a number of specific topics about Hughes. And then as the pandemic hit, Dr. Miller, you were like, okay, well, this is like a specific thing, because I think it would have been really difficult to try to find specific individual topics that we wanted to research without use of a library. So that was one thing about the class that I felt like Dr. Miller did a great job of, was taking that situation of the pandemic and giving us some guidance on ways that we could still succeed in the class and do meaningful research through this project in the extenuating circumstances.
Here's a specific question that the audience might want to know, and that is, did Simone ever perform this in front of Hughes at Backlash Blues, the song? Was he ever part of an audience where she sang the song in front of him?
Yeah, so deep embedded in the timeline, when people have a chance to see somebody that knows how to actually share a screen, you can go down the timeline and you can track in there, and you'll find that it's November 22nd, 1966. It's likely the first time the song was ever sung, and Hughes is in attendance at Philharmonic Hall in New York City. And so just imagine that context, right? Simone's preparing a song for the person that hand delivered the poem to her. Hughes is going to be out there, and we have the reviews. We know that the audience signaled it out. The applause was intense and prolonged. And so what starts to happen from that moment becomes really interesting when you follow Isaac's research out to kind of the nth degree. After Hughes dies, Simone returns to the Philharmonic in 1968. And it's the first time she's gone back there when Hughes isn't in the audience. And so the introduction is done to Simone's performance by a man named Ed Williams. And in producing an introduction for Nina Simone, he starts quoting a Langston Hughes poem. It's almost like the absence of Hughes's presence at places like Newport, at places like Philharmonic, triggers something in Simone, and he becomes kind of this presence in any number of regards. So yeah, Hughes is there November 22nd, 1966, listening to the performance, and it's got to be kind of a shocking experience in that regard.
Here's an interesting question, given your professions that you guys are pursuing now. As teachers, how do you share this project with your students? How would you go about imagining this living in your classroom?
So I'm not sure if this is the same for my colleagues on, the collegiate level, but for me, this project had such an impact on my life that I wanted to make sure that I would get to share this with students in some capacity. So I've worked with my 8th grade team. We are going to be doing a civil rights archive. Each of the subjects is going to do a different contribution. Of course, for me, will be reimagining and writing famous speeches from the civil rights movement and performing. Our history class will be doing different debates on which are the best speeches. Math will have a role in science. So my kids will be learning to put it all together into a final archive for the end of next year. And since they're 8th graders, this will be something they're leaving behind for the next class and the next class as they move to high school.
For me, I haven't quite figured out how I want to plug this project yet, but I want to. There are a few other things I learned in the course, in the Langston Hughes course that I am currently are going to be using. That's Hughes' work with American identity and what it means to be American. So there's a lot of material there, poetry, essays, that type of thing, to discuss with students. And I think that's really timely now to kind of examine what it means to be American.
Jason, we got a question here that maybe you can provide some groundwork for of understanding this a little more. Can you give a quick background on Nina Simone's music career and her development as an activist? Was she active in the anti-war movement and the women's movement of the 1970s? Isaac was going there, I think, and alluding to some of this. So Isaac, you could answer this as well. So
I'll jump in, and anything I forget, Isaac, please add. I know where to start, but hardly know where to end. Simone is a rare example of someone an entire community supported. When she became an outstanding musician in Tryon, North Carolina, the entire community rose up to get her lessons. She did not attend Juilliard other than doing a summer session, and she did study, and her goal was to be a concert pianist. As Mary Burnett told Lauren over and over again, her favorite musician was Bach, and that's not some highbrow answer, that's the truth. And so Simone imagined herself being a Black woman concert pianist. She eventually did some work at not only Juilliard, but at a number of other institutes that were important. But she was trying to raise enough money to reapply to get into the Curtis Institute of Music. And that's how she ended up in clubs in Newark and Philadelphia. She had no intention of being a stage jazz musician. So she records her first album in 58. 59, it's finally released, but it's far more than a year. It ends up being close to 17 months after it was recorded, which is eons of time in that era. By 1960, you've tracked her all the way through from 64 to 67. She's more or less at the height of her career, writing very civil rights heavy songs. What Mahalia Jackson was to the nonviolent movement led by Dr. King, Nina Simone was to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Stokely Carmichael would say without blinking that Simone was the voice of the civil rights movement. Her career seems to start tapering down in the late 60s. By 1970, she has a feeling it's about ready to end, but she revives it, brings it back. She moves to Libya for a few years, ends up spending time in France, and she feels, rightfully so, that many of the albums she recorded were ones that were she was never fully compensated for, and that battle kind of continues. There's a lot more to say, but that's a general overview.
And she has a lot of opinions about Eurocentric beauty standards. She wrote a song in the mid 60s called For Women. And it was an appreciation for Black female features. So I would say that maybe even before the movement got big, she was contributing.
Someone else has asked, are there other examples of Hughes' verse in Simone's songs? And this speaks to, I think, an important point that I spoke with some of you about, was that Langston Hughes craved for his poems to almost be recorded in a musical format to a degree. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, so I could probably speak a little bit to this, and feel free to jump in, Dr. Miller. So the thing that I found most interesting, especially about my research with this particular poetic sequence, because there's not really a good way to describe Ask Your Mama. There's poetic sequence is probably the most apt because it's a collection, sure, but when you actually parse through the entire booklet, it really does feel like it is a musical expression set to poetry, but also to textualize, set to very textualized music. And I mean that quite literally. There are like actually liner notes on the side to where there is an actual where there's an actual like orchestra in mind to where his to where his words are in fact musical lyrics, but yet you can read them separately and listen to the music separately. But it's kind of hard to divorce the two in itself. In fact, I believe, and Dr. Bill, please correct me if I'm wrong, was in the 1990s or the early 2000s or 2010 where they actually did start to set where they actually did create the music for the sequence where they had several iterations of this where the professional speakers actually enact this sequence in reality.
You're absolutely right, Austin. The Langston Hughes project from a professor at the University of Southern California, the other USC, I'm listening to you, Austin, went back and said, musical notations are in these margins. Let's actually set it to music. And the project is fascinating because they go into local areas and they work with people to actually be the speakers. They change the performances every time. One version of the entire catalog can be found on there. When we say there's rare audio and this is an auditory experience, you'll find every version of Backlash Blues we know out there. You'll also find audio I tracked down from Germany that isn't found anywhere in America on these particular things. But to your question here for a second, as we think about this, there's one other thing that really is quite interesting. Is that showing up?
It did for a minute, Dr. Miller, and then it went back to the black screen with the slim.
Is it there now?
There we go.
Interesting. Hughes was always trying to get his songs performed. The great Paul Robeson would recite a great piece of work by Hughes called Freedom Train. You can still listen to that on Spotify. Josh White recorded other songs of his. The ultimate ambitious project would be to try to track down all the recordings of Hughes's work. But this is a document in which Hughes suggests that Simone sings songs of enticement, bewitchment, voodoo, hoodoo, conjuration, bedevilment, spell casting, and incantation before she ever records I Put a Spell on You. And here's the actual document, the listing of items. You can see the actual lyrics that Hughes wrote. And so he was always trying to get Simone to sing a number of things. What Simone ended up doing is taking that title and saying, well, I can't say you cast a spell on me. I need to be the sorceress. So she found Jay Hawkins' version that you can listen to here of I Put a Spell on You. This becomes the title of Simone's biography. And this becomes the heart of her image as she changes into the high priestess of soul, because she has this notion of voodoo, conjuration, spell casting. And the link here is actually the first song Hughes suggested in 1964, Sea Lion Woman. It's complicated. We don't want to foul or flatter Hughes, but the reality is he, in many ways, kind of tried to sexualize her with the songs he suggested. And he put out a song of enticement of Sea Lion Woman that worked, became the big B-side to the great Mississippi song she would sing and actually would perform on the Steve Allen Show. And he kept going in that direction. So this project also complicates how Hughes was envisioning what Simone should be or could be, and prompts that she did take.
And then the last question that just came in, and then I'll turn it back over to Andrea. Someone has asked here, Bob Kennel has asked, was there any link between Simone working with MLK Jr. on the anti-Vietnam War protests? You might have addressed that a little earlier, explaining kind of how she was viewed.
Very quickly, it's a great question. A lot of times we think of kind of the civil rights movement as this homogenized, monolithic thing, but of course it was very, very fractured. People at the Urban League didn't have the same opinions at the NAACP, it had the opinions at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating, had committees at the CORE, had committees at the Student Christian Leadership Conference. And so we can answer this really quickly, Bob. When Simone met Dr. King, she shook hands with him and said, "I cannot be nonviolent." Simone was straightforward in how she felt about things, and she was not really on that side of the movement. She was on the side of the movement that would make calls for Black power. She was on the side of the movement that wanted action now, and she was on a side that she was very straightforward about in this particular regard. And so even though there would be a lot of overlapping ideas, Simone leaned towards that version of civil rights. What's fascinating, and I'll be quiet because otherwise we'll never get out of here, is that Hughes is in the middle of all that. He's on one side of it and the other side and the third side and the fourth side. He's like the artist that Isaac is. He's kind of the chameleon that can become the subject. And in that regard, it's fascinating to think about him in that light. And again, the things these folks have found have been enlightening to me. Let me be very clear. I have 9 biographies over my left shoulder on Langston Hughes, 9. There is only one substantive reference to Nina Simone in any of those 9 biographies. This is groundbreaking stuff. These folks are finding things that are going to set the agenda moving forward. And as you can hear, our goal is to get this into classrooms in front of folks' eyes, because public engagement, outreach, applied knowledge is also a big arm of the humanities, not just writing for journals and academic folks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Miller. And just to follow up on that, one way to get this in front of people, you guys out there, the site went live last week. Am I right? Correct. So Andrea has put in the chat box the link that will take you there. And it is a rich, wonderful deep dive of a site. I spent once Dr. Miller told me it was live, I spent all last Thursday and Friday in it, listening, watching. You can find out which before we started, they were discussing which their favorite, whose favorite version of Backlash Blues was that was posted on there. And so you'll see all the versions on there that Isaac annotated, and it's just a wonderful, rich project. And so I think Andrea put in there the link, and again, I can give it here too. It's backlash-blues. Is it org or com, Jason?
.com.
.com. Okay, wonderful. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to take another moment to say thank you again to all of our presenters. This has been very fascinating. We are so grateful to be able to feature the incredible work that you are all doing. NC State is so proud to have you guys and to be able to feature you. I also want to thank all of our attendees who have stuck with us and offered up some really incredible questions. Thank you for your support of NC State University. This recording will be posted to the Alumni Association's YouTube account. It will be emailed out to you all, as well as a link to the Backlash Blues live website. Feel free to share that with anybody you may think might find it interesting, alumni and friends, plus anybody who you think would be interested. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. I again want to thank you all for joining us. And as always, we're going to end it with a go Pack.